Florida man is now facing charges in connection with the murder of a woman whose remains were found on Gilgo Beach.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
April 19, 1997. Ruskin, Florida, a town that prided itself on being quiet, secluded, almost untouched by the chaos of the world. But on this day, everything changed. Tanya Denise Jackson, just 26 years old, a U.S. Army veteran, and mother to 2-year-old Tatiana Marie Dykes, vanished without a trace. A mother's love, a child's innocence, both cut short in a brutal and chilling act. While Tanya's story unfolded behind closed doors, it was one of isolation and estrangement. She fought battles both on and off the battlefield, her life marked by struggles, setbacks, and a family that had drifted away. Yet, despite everything, she still had hope, a hope for a future, a chance at something better. But that future would never come. Not for her. And not for her daughter. For over a decade, Tanya's case went cold. Her dismembered body, found in a container in 1997, was just the first clue. But what followed was even more chilling. In 2011, the remains of both Tanya and Tatiana were discovered along Ocean Parkway. The pieces of a story that no one knew existed were now in plain sight, but the question remained, how had this been left unsolved for so long? What truth was buried so deep, hidden for years, that it took decades to uncover? Who was Andrew Dykes? A man whose name was linked to this story but whose connection was only revealed decades after his daughter's brutal death. The man once known only as Baby Doe's father would soon be the key to unraveling a mystery that had haunted Florida for years. Why did it take so long to find justice for Tanya and Tatiana? What was hidden in the years of silence and absence? What secret would finally come to light in 2023, when genetic genealogy would confirm their identities and begin the journey to bring a fugitive to justice? Tonight, we take you deep into a case of betrayal, loss, and a quest for truth. A case that has remained unsolved for decades. A case where the answers were buried, waiting to resurface, just when no one expected. What really happened to Tanya Denise Jackson and her daughter, Tatiana? The investigation begins now. In the summer of 1997, a discovery would change everything. In the small town of Ruskin, Florida, authorities found a container that would soon become the focal point of a mystery. Inside was the dismembered torso of a young woman. It was an image so grisly, so unimaginable, that it rattled the community to its core. But what was even more shocking than the gruesome nature of the crime was the fact that it seemed to come from nowhere. There was no clear motive. No obvious reason why Tanya Denise Jackson, a 26-year-old U.S. Army veteran, had met such a violent end. Tanya had no known enemies. No one to blame. And the family, her family, didn't even know she was missing. Detectives faced a cold and silent investigation. They had no witnesses. No one had reported Tanya missing. No family member had sounded an alarm. Tanya had been estranged from her family for years, living her life far from them. And her daughter, Tatiana, was nowhere to be found either. There were no leads. No trail to follow. The evidence was sparse, and all the police had to go on was a heart-shaped peach tattoo found on the torso, an unmistakable detail, but not enough to tell the story. Family members were blindsided by the discovery. Tanya's mother, who hadn't heard from her daughter in months, couldn't believe it when she was informed that her daughter was dead. "I never knew she was even missing," her mother would later say. The estrangement between them had grown over the years, and with no close contact, there was no reason for the family to suspect anything. Tanya's family, her mother, her father, her siblings, didn't even know that their loved one had vanished. It was as if she had disappeared without a trace long before her body was found. Tanya's estrangement wasn't just from her family. The community of Ruskin described her as a quiet woman, someone who kept to herself. She was a mother, but beyond that, not many knew her well. She didn't seem like someone who would be caught up in something so horrific. People remembered her as reserved, independent, and sometimes, just a little bit distant. As the investigation dragged on, frustration grew. There were no new leads. Detectives had no direction to turn. With no connection to Tanya's family or close acquaintances, the case grew colder by the day. Tanya had become just another unsolved mystery, her name left to echo in empty halls of police stations, forgotten by time. The mystery remained unsolved, quiet, forgotten, and never fully understood. But what no one knew at the time was that Tanya's dismembered body was just the beginning. The pieces of her story, and her daughter's, would remain hidden for over a decade. A discovery in 2011 would bring the investigation back to life. But even then, the truth would take years to emerge. 2011, 14 years after Tanya Jackson's dismembered torso was discovered, the investigation took an unexpected turn. The long-forgotten case was about to resurface. Detectives, initially focused on the search for the notorious Gilgo Beach serial killer, stumbled upon a chilling discovery along the quiet stretch of Ocean Parkway. They found human remains that didn't belong to the victims they were hunting for. It wasn't just one body, but two. Among the scattered remains were the unmistakable signs of Tanya Jackson, her tattooed torso, the one clue that had remained in the case for so long. But what startled the investigators even more was the discovery of a second body. It was Tatiana Marie Dykes, the toddler whose name had become an unsolved mystery in the years following her mother's death. The discovery of both mother and child, together once more after so many years, sent a shockwave through the investigation. How had Tanya and Tatiana's remains ended up here? And why had their bodies been left in such an isolated spot, hidden in plain sight? Could there be a connection to the infamous Gilgo Beach killings? The remains of other victims had been discovered in this area, but Tanya and Tatiana didn't seem to fit the same profile. Was this another case of a twisted serial killer, or was there something more to this story? This discovery would set off a chain of events, leading investigators down a path they hadn't anticipated. It would soon become clear that this case was not only linked to the chilling history of Ocean Parkway but to a fugitive whose name had remained hidden for decades. Tanya and Tatiana's deaths were part of a much larger, more complex story, one that would unravel in ways no one could have imagined. Who killed Tanya Jackson and Tatiana Dykes? And what secrets were buried in their tragic fate? Fast forward to April 2023, a breakthrough came that no one could have predicted. For over 2 decades, Tanya Jackson and her daughter Tatiana had remained ghosts in the system, their deaths unanswered, their names barely spoken. But thanks to a technique that was still emerging in 1997, investigators finally had the key to unlocking the truth: genetic genealogy. Forensic teams, using DNA from the remains, were able to confirm the identities of the victims, the mother, Tanya Jackson, and her child, Tatiana Marie Dykes. With the help of groundbreaking technology, investigators were able to connect the dots. Genetic genealogy, a process that had revolutionized criminal investigations in recent years, allowed them to trace distant relatives and confirm the identities of Tanya and Tatiana. It was a relief for some, but for others, it was just the beginning of a deeper mystery. Detective, we had nothing for years. No way to definitively say who they were, just suspicions. But when we got the results back in 2023, everything changed. Finally, we knew their names, but the questions kept coming. Who did this? Why? And what could possibly drive someone to take the lives of a mother and her young child like that? Tanya's mother: I never thought I'd find out this way. It's like I'm hearing the story for the first time. My daughter, gone. And her little girl too. It doesn't make sense. We thought she was fine, that she just disappeared. But to know she's been, like this, it breaks my heart. But even with this newfound knowledge, one crucial question remained: who was responsible for the deaths of Tanya and Tatiana? The answers were still out of reach. The investigation had just begun. And in this new chapter, everything was about to change. As the pieces of Tanya Jackson and Tatiana Dykes' identities fell into place, another name emerged from the shadows, Andrew Dykes. The estranged father of Tatiana, a man whose connection to the crime would change everything. A man who had, until now, remained hidden in the background of this tragedy. What investigators didn't know was that Andrew Dykes had been living under the radar for years. A fugitive. But why? What had happened to him after Tanya's death? And what could possibly have driven him to commit such a brutal crime? To understand what led Andrew Dykes down this dark path, investigators dug deeper into his relationship with Tanya. Was it one of love, one of pain, or something more twisted? Tanya and Andrew's relationship had been complicated, marked by years of estrangement and tension. But could that alone explain the brutality of what happened? And more importantly, why did Andrew vanish after the crime? Where had he gone, and what had he been hiding all these years? After years of silence, the case took a sharp turn. In 2023, Andrew Dykes, now 66 years old, was arrested in Ruskin, Florida. The man who had been linked to the deaths of Tanya Jackson and her young daughter, Tatiana Dykes, was finally in custody. For decades, his name had haunted the investigation, but now, after years of eluding justice, he was facing the consequences. The moment of his arrest was filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Investigators who had spent years following dead ends now felt the weight of the case begin to lift. For them, it was a moment of victory, proof that justice was still possible, even for a case that had grown cold. But for others, like Tanya's estranged family, it was a long-awaited answer, a step toward closure in a story that had haunted them for decades. As the case moved into the legal system, the story took another step toward resolution. Andrew Dykes was charged with 2 counts of murder, the deaths of Tanya Jackson and her daughter, Tatiana Dykes. The grand jury indictment came quickly after his arrest, but the road to justice would not be as swift. Dykes, now in custody, awaited extradition to New York, where he would stand trial. But justice would come slowly. Dykes remained in custody, awaiting extradition. And while the pieces were finally falling into place, the questions still lingered in the minds of those who had followed the case for so long: what really happened all those years ago? Why was this mother and child killed so violently? And what was the true motive behind such an unimaginable act? As we look back on the case of Tanya Jackson and Tatiana Dykes, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions about our justice system. How could a case of this magnitude go unsolved for so long? How did the pieces of the puzzle remain scattered, ignored, or lost for over 2 decades? It's a question that echoes through the halls of law enforcement, the courts, and the community, each piece of the case revealing a chilling truth: sometimes, the most vulnerable among us are the easiest to overlook. Tanya's life, her struggles, her isolation, didn't just make her a victim of a brutal crime, they made her a casualty of a system that, at times, overlooks the most desperate, the most voiceless. Her estrangement from her family, her quiet life away from them, made it so much easier for her to disappear. For her death to remain a mystery. And the truth? It lingered in the shadows for far too long. This tragedy forces us to ask, could things have been different if Tanya had been more connected with her family? Would the system have acted quicker, had her disappearance been noticed sooner? Tanya's story is one of silence, a silence that allowed her death to remain an unsolved mystery for too long. And while the case has finally moved toward resolution, the haunting truth remains: what would have happened if the connections that were severed hadn't been broken? And so, we're left with more questions than answers. Can a tragedy like this ever truly be resolved? Does justice ever truly come when so much has been lost? The system, the family, the community, all of them missed the signs. And in that absence, Tanya and Tatiana's story remained untold for far too long. It's a story that should never be forgotten, and a reminder that the most vulnerable deserve our attention, our compassion, and our protection. The story of Tanya Jackson and her daughter, Tatiana, is one of pain, tragedy, and finally, justice. For decades, their lives remained a mystery, their deaths a haunting silence. But as the pieces slowly came together, we saw the relentless pursuit of truth bring them the justice they so deeply deserved. Yet, even as this chapter closes, it serves as a reminder that sometimes, the truth is buried deep within the past, waiting for the right moment to surface. But even with Andrew Dyke's arrest, there are still questions left unanswered. Was he the only one involved? What truly drove him to commit such an unspeakable act? And even as justice moves forward, we are left wondering, has the full truth been revealed, or is there more to this story that we may never know?
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.